Today I'm here to talk about how to read a journal article and when and why. This is an explainer and guide for the Gynecological Pathology Online Journal Club. The learning objectives for today are to create an outline for evaluating scientific literature for trainees and to bring clarity to the Gynecological Pathology Journal Club. To do this, I will first tell everyone about said journal club. Then I think it would be prudent to take a step back and talk about why we read the scientific literature, starting with an overview of the different kinds of scientific articles, when and why we turn to them, how to critically evaluate those articles so that the knowledge gained is practical, and finally we will reach a conclusion about how to ideally present articles in a succinct and useful format. The Gynecological Pathology Journal Club was launched in December of 2019, mostly for the fellows at my home institution in Rhode Island. It went online in April 2020, and the goals are to increase knowledge about the topic of the month and to enhance the ability to critically evaluate the literature. It can be found online at this address, which I'll also place in the comments of this lecture. By creating a rotating schedule noted here, every 12 months, we will circle back and in more diverse areas cover a completely different topic. This also allows us to focus on less common but vital areas that trainees will encounter in clinical practice, especially those who are training in GYN pathology and will be considered the de facto experts in their new practice environments. This is a screenshot from my website as an example of April's summary from Journal Club, which includes a recording of the discussion in real time, a follow-up quiz, and a historical record of the articles covered for future reference. I did notice during this meeting a need to make the presentations more formalized and visually appealing for the virtual format, which was the impetus for making this recording. Now we will move on to how journal articles are organized. These are the 7 parts of a journal article. The title gives you the topic and information about the authors. The abstract is a brief overview of the article. The introduction should be the background information and statement of research, hypothesis. The methods should detail how the study was conducted, which procedures were followed, and what instruments and variables were used and which variables were measured. The results should give you all the data along with figures and tables, abstract, or graphs. The discussion is the section where the results are interpreted and what implications the results have. And the references should give you citations of sources where the authors got their information. So now we'll talk briefly about the different types of articles. In general, scientific literature can be either primary or secondary. Original research forms the primary literature and the core of scientific publications, with articles written to present findings on new scientific discoveries or describe earlier work to acknowledge it and place new findings in a new context. Secondary literature includes review articles, book reviews, commentaries, and other forms of publication in which original research information is reviewed. An article published in a peer-reviewed journal has been subjected to review by peers of the author who are independent from the journal and generally helps to ensure a higher quality study. Now we'll move on to why we read journal articles. This is a reference from 1981, which lays out a top 10 list of sorts to guide why people read journal articles. I would argue that reasons 1, 2, and 10, or to impress others, to keep abreast of professional news, and to be titillated by letters to the editor, while might not apply to our discussion today, but parenthetically, I don't think I have ever impressed anyone with my knowledge of journal articles, but I have been amused at spicy letters to the editor. So today we'll instead focus on The other 7 reasons, which I would sort into understanding the disease, which are the starred items, which they list as to understand pathobiology, to learn the clinical features and course of a disorder, and to determine etiology or causation. And then the arrows to diagnosis and treatment of disease, other words, to find out how a seasoned clinician handles a particular problem, to find out whether to use a new or existing diagnostic test on your patients, to distinguish useful from useless or even harmful therapy, and to sort out claims concerning the need for and use of quality and cost effectiveness of clinical and other healthcare. This is a figure from another paper that puts it all together more or less, that you start off by deciding what you're looking for, an idea for research or diagnosis, therapy or prognosis, or a topic overview and update, and then you can follow this flowchart to decide which kind of article you should be looking for. Now we'll move on to talk about how to evaluate an article. To comment on this, I will chart a path through the different sections of a typical paper to show how I approach this, and it is not in order. I usually start with the title. Does it contain the relevant words that you want? Does it seem coherently written? And as an added bonus, does it let you know something about what they found? I always think that this is helpful, and I think it makes an article much better. Also, it can be helpful at this stage to look at the authors to see if the article is coming from someone you have read before, someone whose ideas you already trust. Also, journals which are indexed in PubMed are a reliable source of information. The link is at the end of the presentation to tell if a journal is indexed. Most of the journals indexed in PubMed are peer-reviewed, which in general hints at greater quality control and quality of findings presented. Next, I move on to the abstract. This is where the authors have condensed their findings down and includes abbreviated versions of the methods, results, and conclusion sections, essentially. Are the study aims well defined? Is the design well constructed? Were sufficient cases included? Were the methods clearly explained, and are they up to date? Are the results clearly laid out? Do the conclusions they reach seem in keeping with the results? Many times you can decide if a paper fits your needs after only looking at these 2 sections. Next, I personally move onto the results, though I do not necessarily read the words written at this point. I look at the tables and figures, which as an aside is why this is such a critical part of any publication. The visual display of data should give the reader a broad overview of what the authors found. If I am hooked at this point, I usually download and save the article, which I keep sorted according to organ system on a drive in my computer. Broadly speaking, results should be presented in a transparent way, with cases which were excluded clearly explained. I then move on to the discussion where good papers will put their findings into context, explain any unexpected findings from their paper, and compare their results to other historic publications. Also, areas where the study could be clinically applicable will be noted here. Additionally, most authors will acknowledge the limitations of their study. For example, there weren't enough cases by necessity. Some patients fell out of follow-up groups, or there's a bias in their data set due to study collection. And also, most authors will note areas for improvement or further study. This is the section where the paper should all come together. The methods section should in essence be clearly stated enough so that the study could be replicated, and should demonstrate a coherent and logical application of current techniques as well as statistical methods. A complete discussion of statistical methods is beyond the scope of this presentation, however. If the authors did hypothesis testing, they should say what statistical method was used, and if a model was used, i.e. if there are p-values and confidence intervals, the methods section should explain how they were generated, and if anything was controlled for, this should be explained, and it should make sense to you. The introduction section briefly summarizes prior research on the topic and lays out an argument for the current study. It is most helpful to review this section in depth if you are new to a topic. The reference section is helpful to those who are new to a subject and wish to review the historical literature, or to those who are writing a paper, which is when I find myself diving into it very deeply, to make sure all the prior pertinent references on a topic have been consulted and included. At this point, we have reviewed all of the elements, and now I'll proceed with a summary. So this is a basic flowchart of how I move through an article. Mostly it's pretty self-explanatory, but I think for those starting out evaluating the literature, it could be helpful to see something like this. It's tempting when you're first starting out to just start at the beginning of a paper and read it to the end. But I think modifying how you look at a paper and critically evaluating it from the jump can help save you time, especially if you are wading through lots of results. You can use this to screen through papers to try to find the high yield ones. So now in conclusion, and to distill what we've learned so far into an outline for an ideal presentation at the online GYN Pathology Journal Club. A presentation of no more than 7 slides will be presented, which can be shared at the time you are speaking. You should keep the slides themselves brief, with tables, figures, and numbers, and use your notes to fill out the slides. It's important not to just cut and paste large swaths of the article and read them out loud. Try to put visually captivating material on the slides for everyone to focus on while you are explaining them. Your first slide should have the title, authors, and citation. That will be pretty basic. But if you want to, on this slide, also comment about the authors and whether they're familiar to you. And if you think that the title did a good job explaining the findings, that's a good thing to think about as well. And then for study design, you need to ask yourself, what question does the article seek to answer? Make this the slide where you explain the abstract without reading it to the group, basically. Make it your elevator pitch for the article. You can fold in the introduction material briefly into the slide to bring everyone up to speed. For the methods section, you should tell us how the cases were selected, what testing was performed, and what statistical methods were used, although you don't need to get too into the weeds about statistics. In the results slide, you want a general summary, but it's important here to present the findings as the authors presented them. So presenting pertinent tables, if there are a few in the article that you think it would be important, or figures to share with everyone. The discussion slide should explain to everyone how the results fit into the historical context. And then an important slide is the strengths and areas for improvement. So this is really where we bring our own knowledge of the topic to the article. This isn't what the authors did. This is what we see as areas that were strong about the article, and then other areas that could be improved upon. And then the piece that's very important for how we all evaluate articles, and especially trainees who are going into practice, is, can you implement these findings? So what are the applications? Can you implement them in your daily practice? Or are they a building block to something else? And sometimes it's okay to just say, this article is very basic science oriented. I don't see a clear application for clinical practice. That's okay. It doesn't mean it's not a paper that's worthy of review. It just means that there's no pertinent clinical applications for that material. So how will it work? This is the schedule for GYN Pathology Journal Club. The first Wednesday of the month, a newsletter goes out to everyone who's signed up for the listserv. If you want to, you can volunteer to present. If you are one of those who volunteers and is selected, and it's usually based on first come, first serve, you'll be emailed a blank template that I just talked about with the 7 slides with explainers on each slide. And then the third Wednesday of the month at noon, we will have a 1-hour meeting with 3 articles presented, and each should take no more than 10 to 12 minutes. That'll leave enough room for a group discussion at the end and perhaps in between articles. After that, a follow-up quiz with an evaluation will be mailed to everyone who attended, and answers to the quiz will be posted on the website as noted there. If you have any feedback about this presentation or about GYN Pathology Journal Club, you can reach me through my website, which is listed there, natalieba.net, or I'm on Twitter at nataliebene. And my references for this article are listed here and also on the slides that I took screenshots from. So thank you so much for listening.